And I am also going to turn on the live transcription so that we can make this happen.
Sure.
Okay, enable.
Bina.
There we go.
There we go. Hey,
here we go.
Okay. Look at all the books. Nice offices we have.
So Theresa and I, some of you might know, have been teaching in global studies for a very long time. And I kind of have been thinking about this a little bit with the GS newsletter, summer newsletter that Emily Hannon asked if there would be a good contribution I could make. And I could think of no better way than to connect two friends, two colleagues in global studies. And so I reached out to Theresa Romkey, and I thought it would be a perfect opportunity for us to talk a little bit about our lives with global studies. And so I had a list of questions, but really this is a conversation, a free-flowing conversation about what it's been like and where we've been. And I want to really, lift up Theresa. Theresa has been a member of the GS department for 20 years, everybody, 20 years since I have known her. She's always been at least mostly involved with global studies, other departments as well, but global studies has been for her and I in our hearts, and a lot of our teaching has been with global studies. So 20 years, I'm going to say September 2022 is the anniversary of this remarkable contribution to this really incredible department, in which there is a lot of change and ebbs and flows and ups, downs. I guess that's what ebbs and flows mean, right? So thanks, Theresa, for agreeing to do this. And I'm really excited for us to reconnect and have this conversation.
Thanks, Bina. And just for everybody to know, I might be 20 years, Bina's 17 years. So between us, I was thinking of this the other day, 37 years of teaching between the two of us. No, and like you said, in global studies, but you're right behind me with this, and you are my friend, but also such an important part. We have both been an important part in global studies. Yeah. And it's interesting doing sort of thinking back in where we came into the program and where the program is today, because it evolves. But yeah, you're right behind me, friend, with the almost 20 years. And we have both joined the Century Club, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, I think.
Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to get on record is how you came to be in global studies. How did all that happen?
Yeah, and it's so as you said, I came into Laurier 20 years ago and into global studies, almost immediately into global studies. I came in through sociology. My training, my education is through sociology. So I thought that I was coming into Laurier to teach in sociology, and I do teach in sociology. I have always taught in both departments. But once I started teaching, I met Len Friesen. So I had heard that Len Friesen, Dr. Len Friesen, who now teaches in the history department. And he at that time was the head of global studies, and he was in the process of expanding global studies. So I walked into the department when they were moving from development studies into a broader mandate. And that's where we saw the shift 20 years ago into three distinct departments with the three components of global studies. So peace and conflict studies, international development, which we continued, and then globalization and culture. So Len was looking for someone to lead tutorials for GS 101, the first year course. At that time, we didn't, we had 101 and we had 102, but 101 was sort of the broad course for all students. And that's what I came in to do. And for a decade of my life, along with you, we taught GS 101 tutorial, and I loved it. And
Yes,
I
yes.
taught in other departments, like in sociology, and I taught in women's studies, but I every year came back. Now, part of that was Len Friesen was, a joy to work with, and, the camaraderie of Len plus you teaching together as co-instructors was my ideal type of teaching environment. And so I really enjoyed it. And I fell in love with global studies as a department, but also the students. It was
Oh,
so
yeah.
extraordinary. What a teaching experience to
Teresa,
have that level
yeah.
of engagement. But it was Len that brought me in, and then I found a home there. What about you? What your background is education? So how did you get in global?
Well, my formative years at Laurier, I still count as GS 101. And
Right.
I have a very vivid memory of actually teaching where the Lazaretus building is now. That used to be an old elementary school called St. Mike's.
I remember it well.
And Theresa would be teaching in one of the rooms and I'd be teaching in the other. And we had so many tutorials, so many students. I want to say like 1,000 students a year, and we would come out of our little rooms, and a new group would come in, and then they would leave another group. And that material in GS 101 really compelled me because it had to do with what do you believe about the world? Kind of a big question. And when I arrived, it was the same. Len Friesen, along with Crystal Verdun, who was the chair of Canadian Studies here, they both really encouraged me. I had come from Trent, which was very much a hub for the study of globalization, the study of international studies, IDS, as we used to call it, International Development Studies. And I'd come from an interdisciplinary background. So that was something I think that appealed to them as somebody on the other side of the desk. But those early years of teaching GS 101, I have really vivid memories of that space. All the fountains were down low.
I was going to say, this is what I remember. So, like, just to reiterate, it was before that, the business building, there was a public or a primary school.
Yeah.
And you can imagine, like, the fountains were short, everything was small. It was very fascinating. And the big classrooms, we would all sit in a circle because we had the desks that could move, and I would sit everybody in a circle. And big windows. I remember watching, St. Patrick's Day out of those windows. Watching, because they would back into the backyards, and I'd watch parties happen. It was just really good, fond memories of students. But you're absolutely right. In those days, you and I would both run, I think, Fridays all day, and so we would be there. I would do 6-7 tutorials back to back in that time period.
A little bit like Groundhog Day. Remember Groundhog Day, the movie? It's like over and over.
Funny. And I don't think people appreciate, the idea of doing the same conversation. And that's actually, for students, it's interesting to know, like, how did we come up with the tutorial grading sheet? And how did we
That was you. That was your innovation. Yeah.
Well, part of it was very practical, because when you have the same conversation, it's all deja vu. And especially by time 4 and time 5, it's hard to remember and you want to be consistent.
Yeah.
And so the tutorial questions serve 2 purposes. One, that students were prepared. They were ready to talk. 3. They were ready to talk. They'd read the material, ready to talk. It allowed for the quieter students to respond in written form, who aren't going to participate, so that they have a voice. It's just a different voice. And I think both of us agree that's really important. But it's completely self-serving. It allowed me to stay on top and to make sure that I was covering the same material. Would you agree with that? And it's worked. We honed it over a decade, and we have continued that format. Both of us use that format to this
For
day.
sure. Yeah, for the tutorials, it's been adapted and readapted with innovations to it. And, you know, the idea that students could play a role in evaluating, honestly, hopefully evaluating their contribution for that day. Everybody has an off day in tutorials. And
Right.
so this gives them a chance to say, yeah, today was not my day, but you know, most other days I come to class prepared. I have these questions that are on my mind at the very least, because I've had to sit down and think about them. But those early days are just really precious for me. And I really love
Yeah, and I remember,
101.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? I love teaching 20 years ago, and I love it today. Like
Wow.
it just, that has been the
Yeah.
consistent, you know, that's been consistent through time for me. You know, like every job, there are ebbs and flows.
Yes.
But what I've really enjoyed is global studies historically, currently is a family. And it's always felt like that. You know, we started this by saying, you know, we both came in with Professor Friesen, but beyond that, then it changed as departments do, and different department head came in and different people teaching the course.
Yeah.
We both worked, you know, with different professors over the years. And
you know, in 101, I realized that I taught with Len Friesen. I taught with Jeff Grisho, who was a former Trent person. Remember?
Also from history.
Also now in history.
Yeah.
Alex and Alex Lata and Ali Zaidi. And so there was, for me, this sort of evolution. Everybody brings to it a different energy and vibe, but the tutorials were where we got to hash out, right? Is Zaidi correct in what he's saying? Is you know, do you agree with this ethical question? And one of my favorite articles, and I think you will remember this too. Well, there's two. One was by Richard Sennett, and there was another one that we used to read by Zygmunt Bauman.
Love it. Still use it.
Still use it. Holy moly.
Still use it. Still talk about Zygmunt Bauman, right? Does poverty serve a purpose in the capitalist system? Absolutely. It's a great article. And if I remember correctly, I don't remember who brought that in. I think Professor Lotta brought that one in. But still talk about it, because it still really does it serve a purpose. We keep saying we want to abolish these problems, these social problems, but do we? Do they serve a purpose, right? The spectacle of homelessness, the spectacle of poverty, still informed. Absolutely. We used to have a book as well, like the short introduction to globalization. And I still have it somewhere here. I know, Steger, Manfred Steger. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting what stays with you. Case studies that stayed with me. You know, in GS 101 and then GS 102, we used to do a case study for Latin America. Oh, right. I don't know if you remember that. Yes, I do remember hearing the conversation. Yeah. And so it was interesting. What's been your favorite moment? I obviously, for both of us, 101 was seminal in the department. In terms of our teaching lives, our teaching strategies, teaching together, the collaborative aspects of working with different faculty members. But is there something that stands out other than 101 that really feels like, wow, that was a memory that I'm never going to forget? Yeah, I remember. So I think it was about 11 or 12 years ago, I started teaching in Global Studies 201, which is the theory course. And why it stands out as a memory, first of all, I've always worked with wonderful people in 201. In 201, the theory course used to be team taught. So we would have 3 professors doing lectures, and then I was the consistent. I would do the tutorials with this. But I remember when it was being created and deciding what theories belong in global studies, what theories don't, and hatching it out as a group, you know, the 4 of us trying to figure out which belongs. And it was such an interesting process with that. And it always evolves. You know, we add theories, we take away theories every year with that course.
Right.
And this year, I'm actually teaching it this year, the GS 201. And we went from having different people teaching it to one person. And so Sarah Matthews has taught it, Lada's taught it over the years, different people have taught it. And so it's interesting. And again, rethinking what belongs here, what theories really define global studies. And the problem is there are too many. And so something has to go. You have to give up some.
Yeah.
And so
Is there a theory that in that course that you think students really struggled with, that you loved?
No, not so much a theory. Can I go the other way? There was
Yeah.
a theory that we introduced, conservatism. For the first few years we taught the course, we didn't include it.
Right.
And it was added. And I mean, big shock. Not politically do I sort of subscribe to that theory, but if you're teaching a theory course, you have to be passionate about whatever theory you're teaching. And so certainly I've come to have a healthy respect for conservatism, the history of conservatism. So reading Burke and Hume and all of those historical figures and understanding where is conservatism today compared to the historical. So I would say I have a greater appreciation for that theory. Now I'm a Marxist, so I'm going to love. When it's Marxist Day, the students are like, hold your hat. It's going to be a fun one because I'm an unapologetic Marxist, and so I love that, and I love not that I'm out to convince students that that's the best theory, but just to share the excitement. Because even if there are parts of conservatism, even I, as a Marxist, dismiss. Marxism that I dismiss. But you've got to sort of see the whole and see, is there a critique? And so I love that course. And, over the years, certain theories have been added, Indigenous ways of knowing and theorizing, which I had to educate myself. I knew a bit, but I didn't know enough. And so every year there's always new things I have to learn. I love postmodernism because that's just trippy and the students find it trippy and I think it's very fun. Now I like postmodernism less after an era of Trump. Because I used to have fun conversations about what is truth, what is reality.
Yeah.
And now it feels like we're in a different era. And so it reads different. And so it's interesting to me how it can read differently in different time.
Well, I was going to say, what an enlightening conversation, because for me, my emphasis has been in the field of culture. So culture and globalization. So in those courses, we talk a lot about cultural hybridity and identity and what does it mean to live in a world where, race and culture and religion and some of these aspects of how we think about who we are have evolved. And, I've been teaching GS 221 for a really long time through the lens of food. And
students always say, that's the thing they say about, Bina's food obsessed.
Yes.
And I was like, she likes a good meal.
Yeah, I do. And I think Edmund Priest was really originally one of the major people who was in that stream. And and then I thought, well, how could I bring something of myself, something of my culture, my identity as a woman, as somebody of color, somebody who lived in all of these colonized spaces, certainly in my imaginary India and Africa, coming from East Africa, being born there, living in England, and then of course here in Canada, and then married to, in a mixed race situation. All of those things kind of came together to me in the metaphor of food. Of course, it's not really about food. Don't tell anybody. But it's actually about these big questions of how we come to be. And so GS 220, which I had a chance to do tutorials this term with Professor Zaidi, and then 221, really seminal for me. And I have students do in there like a creative assignment. And, you know, the assignments are really interesting too, because they have to be, for me, really meaningful. And something, I mean, I think you give them, Theresa, in your classes, I think you give them like solid nitty gritty data, information, history. And in my class, it's a little bit more, you know, who are you and how do you think about how this food fits into your, you know, notions around globalization or colonization and those kinds of things. And I have to say, my favorite all-time author is Edward Said. I will say it right now, Edward Said. Love, love, love Edward Said. So
yeah, you know what's funny? When Said died, I got like emails from people saying, "Are you okay?"
I
know. And I was like, "Okay, I'm a fan."
Yeah,
but
yeah.
You know,
and juxtaposed with that was like Clash of Civilizations, and you know, so we're kind of getting all of these very, you know, seminal works that make their way into our courses, but they make their way into my life in a way, you know, into how I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, that's the other theory, the post-colonial theory. As a feminist, post-colonial theory, especially, you know, within feminism, has always been so important. I was educated through the lens of intersectionality, and I bring it into everything I teach. Everything I touch is through that lens. I try to think about how inclusive I could be. The other thing, I'd be hard pressed to mention, like GS 202, which is the methods course. So about the same time period, about 11 years ago, I started doing the tutorials for GS 202. And again, I loved it because we do a research proposal. It's the dreaded research proposal, but as you were talking about, it is an assignment that it's practical. It's how can I use this in this information about methods, how to do good research in a very practical way. And it's one of my favorite projects. And students may not agree with me because it's hard and it's a pain in the rear and all of these things, but it is, by the end, I know students are so happy that they've done it because they've learned more about methods in the doing. They can memorize what is quantitative, what is qualitative, all of these terms, but until they have to walk through the process and sometimes stumble through the process, thinking, how am I going to recruit people? How am I, like the minutia of it? Then that's actually when they learn the most. And I like that.
Yes.
I'm the practical soul. You're the big picture. I'm the practical soul.
I have to tell you, so many of our students cross over and they don't know that we know each other. And one of my students, well, there's been so many, Erin and Michaela, and I think you probably remember from years ago, Akil, Camille, Perry, Josh, Emma, Rafia, so many of these faces and names, their experiences really stand out for me. And I remember thinking one time, one of the students did an assignment for me in which she said that her grandmother was dying and she didn't know really how to connect with her in the hospital. And so she took her assignment. She actually took her a GS 221 assignment to the hospital and read it to her nonna. And it was just the most powerful thing. And it kind of made me feel like, wow, that made a difference in someone's life. Even if in some small way, it made a difference. And all of those people, I had my son's high school graduation just a week ago. And he, when I was there, I was looking and there was somebody there and I was like, who is that? And it turns out that it was a student who is a global studies major doing all kinds of community work now. And I was, like working with high school students who are marginalized, who have come from war situations, and just an incredible testament to the work that students are doing. I see our student Camille on TV, on the radio, in social media, practically every other day. And So to know that students are out there doing such amazing things really warms my heart. It makes me feel like, okay, so how do you make a difference in the world?
Yeah.
It's through other people. For me, it's like through like these students going out and doing these things, just
Well,
absolutely powerful.
yeah, and I agree with you. And it's interesting because, there's, as we age, those are the big questions. What difference am I making in this world? And
Mhm.
teaching does make a huge difference. And I always, encourage people, if they love it, to think about teaching. And now our new cohort in global studies has a lot of people who are going to be teachers. But it is
Mhm.
a great profession for that. I remember, the experience. So my son Bruce is a little bit older than your kids, your boys, but I remember going to a graduation, and it was funny because how many students came up to me at the graduation? Bruce was quite surprised because we were going to the graduation to celebrate Bruce's girlfriend's graduation. And how many of the students came up, and it's like, Teresa, and came up and said hello. And it was
Yeah.
just overwhelming and humbling to know that you do make a difference as a good teacher.
And they actually
And
remember you.
yeah, no, and it was lovely. And it was very funny because, as sons do, sometimes they forget their parents have a life outside of the home.
Right.
And it was quite an interesting experience with this. But for me, it was quite humbling because, they remember that. I think what they remember is that we're passionate about teaching. We both have that passion,
Yeah.
and that we care, and that, these are things that as an educator, you can't fake, the
Yeah.
passion that
Yeah.
you bring.
Yeah.
And you don't have to buy everything I'm selling, but I always think it is like my job is to be as honest as I can, which sometimes, pisses off some students because I add too much of my own opinion. But the other alternative is to be as vanilla as possible and not be
Mhm.
passionate. And that's,
Mhm.
I don't want to teach if that's what the kind of teaching I have to do. I like the fact, that's what I've loved about global studies. I've always, and I hope, this, you agree with this, is that I've always felt like I've had free reign, that,
Mhm.
I can be the kind of teacher that I want to be, the
Yeah.
kind of instructor that I want to be, and that it's not just, it's it's celebrated, it's encouraged.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we co-teach with other people, we don't think about that we have to agree on everything. If anything to say, we come at it from different lenses, and that's the joy of global studies.
Yeah. Alicia Slawinski and I taught together for a dozen years in
Yes,
GS 211, which is
yes,
I think I took the reins from you after you had done it for some years.
yeah,
And it just made us so connected in terms of, wanting to make sure that it was a great experience every single week. Like it was not that it was like, okay, we'll make this course really a good course, but it was every single week bringing it, dropping the mic. And
yeah,
she's been really influential for me in terms of thinking about the big questions around development. And so a lot of that course really gets into some of the nitty gritty about how does development work? What is development anyway? Why do we do it? What are some of the pitfalls? And students, it becomes kind of formative in students' minds, our majors at least, that leave the course, leave the program, and that foundational, material becomes such a big part of how they think about the world and how they think about, okay, now I'm going to leave this institution. How do I do it better? How do I do it in
yeah.
a way that's not so fraught with some of the problems of doing good work, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm with you. And someone that's taught in the department longer than I have, Ejiboa, Professor Ejiboa.
Oh,
John,
I love
I love working with John. I have for all these years, and haven't worked with him enough, but I've always had him as a great colleague. And
John.
I'm back to working with him in 102. And again, it's so nice to be in a first year course. And it's funny because there are some semesters in the winter term, that I will teach a first year course in global studies and a fourth year course in parenthood in sociology. And so I'm from first year to fourth year.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because of course there are differences in the years, but there are core consistencies. And again, it's about the conversation. It's about that kind of teaching. It is that conversation with students that students are hungry for. And just the topic changes, but they're interconnected. It's interesting. But yeah, Ejeboa needs to be celebrated because he's one of the originals in the department as well. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like we need a party. It would be great to. When I wrote to you about this, I was asking you to reflect on how many students you thought you have taught.
Yeah.
And when I saw that number, I was like, holy mackerel.
Yeah. So I don't keep track of how many students I teach per term. And we should, especially certain names that come up. I don't know how many Emilys I've had over the years. Or Michaels. Help me with the Michaels or Ashleys, that kind of thing. But 20 years of teaching, I can do the math and tell you the numbers are well over 10,000 students that I've had. Because I've been very fortunate. I've been very well employed at Laurier. And so I have consistent work. And again, it's interesting, when I've seen colleagues come and go, some of that tenured, some of that non-tenured contract faculty. But it's, the number, and the thing is, some people count, I guess, but that's my best estimate. It's about 11,000 in total over years. Your
I'm sure.
Must be high. Do you keep track?
Well, being part of the Century Club, somebody asked me, so the Century Club means.
To explain what the Century Club is. Yeah.
Yes. So Century Club is that you are at 100 courses. And so when I looked at that number and I got the letter, I thought, wow, this is momentous in my career. Right. And you think, is this the time that I just, okay, I've made the mark, I'm done, Century Club, see you later. But I just have a hard time letting go. But I think I've probably taught close to what you have in terms of student numbers as well. But when I got that letter, it really had an emotional impact on me, more than practically everything else. That just represents to me a lot of hard graft work on my part, but also on students' parts, and through a pandemic, some of it. You probably got your Century Club before the pandemic.
I missed the party. Yeah, because and then everything closed down. The university sent me, I don't know if you got it, the check for $100.
I got a check for $100 too.
But it was like they usually have a big celebration for this, and they didn't because everything closed down. But I felt the same way. I was like, because I don't know if students realize when we say one course, that's 3 tutorials equals 1 course. So even more numbers when you start thinking, how many tutorials have I run over the years? Goodness. How many, and you start to run those numbers.
And a lot of those courses are big courses. They're not students with 20 students or 40 students or even 60 students. These are students with hundreds of students at a time. And, each one of them is still somewhere in my consciousness, is still in my, so even though there are that many, Century Club to me really kind of culminates for me the hard work in GS, but also in other departments around the university. And it's just such a big momentous thing. Did you do anything by yourself to celebrate the?
Well, you know what?
He gave you $100. Did you spend it?
$100. We went out to dinner. No, we didn't even then because it was closed down. No, but my family really picked up on it. You know, my son Bruce was very excited for me. He knows think about it. He spent 2/3 of his life at Laurier, you know, coming to visit me at school and sitting in classes, things like that. And he was very appreciative. My partner, Mike, was very excited for me, you know, to get to this milestone. I think it just makes you think back, you know, because friends sometimes, you know, I'm in my 50s now, mid-50s, and friends will say, are you thinking about retiring? Because, you know, they're in jobs that they often hate and they can't wait. And they really get irritated with me because I was like, I don't want to. I love what I do. Now, what that changes, as long as I'm physically able, because as I age, I think about that. I think about ageism. I think about ableism more than I probably did in my 30s in teaching. So having the stamina to teach, things like that. But, you know, it's just so enjoyable. I think why I love my job, though, is because I teach different things. If I had to teach the same course and only that course, perhaps I would feel differently. But for me, just like you with North American Studies, I think that having different disciplines makes me a better instructor, because I'm a better sociologist because of global studies. I'm better in global studies because of my background in sociology, because I've been trained to be such a good critical thinker in terms of, you know, asking questions, that kind of thing.
What a great point. What a great point. Like how interdisciplinary, like what different questions each discipline brings and how we interrogate those perspectives differently from the lens of sociology versus, you know, even literature. We use literature in global studies, which to me is just really, and testimony.
When I teach a course, Sociology of Families, which I'll teach this fall, I bring in global studies because I think of the more global context. It's the students that are sitting in front of me didn't have the same experience with family. And so immigration is a part of that narrative, but it's not just an add-on. It is fundamental to how we understand. And so I think that the two bleed together. And the funniest experience I have is when I get a global studies student in my sociology course. Because then my words collided. And then I'm like, what are we talking about here? Because I know that person, and that's the highest compliment when I see that, because I have students that will take whatever course I'm teaching. And so they follow. And that to me, but it does confuse me sometimes. I'm thinking, because in my mind, my worlds are divided, even though we share a floor on the dog. My worlds are divided.
Right. Sociology is on the same floor. Right.
Yeah. You do this with
and you know, I have the same thing, because a lot of some of the students are not majors. They're just taking it because they heard about you, and you know, they want to take a course with you. And I just really find that amazing. I had a group of girls who took GS 221 some years ago, and they still connect with me on WhatsApp, right?
Really?
Abby Barrett and her friends, they're like,
Abby,
yes, so great. Like they're just now they've got their own jobs, their own careers, their own partners. They're like moving on to such a different stage in their life. And when I see that, I just feel like so privileged that they were a part of my course.
Yeah, and that's what I've missed in a lot. You know, you were talking about the pandemic. What I've really missed is in-person office hours, because often what will start with a question about the course becomes a conversation. I don't know how many conversations, and I'm no trained therapist, so don't come to me for it. But they will come and have conversations about, you know, their courses, their majors, what to do next, graduate school. I've had conversations about partners. I've had conversations about family. That I teach about family. Like those are, you know, you're asking what is in the memory. Often is, you know, having students who have struggled in a course and then are embarrassed to take a course again with me. And I was like, no, I'm all about redemption. I've had students that fail the course and then get 8A plus the next course with me.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so life is complicated. We
yeah,
all can have shitty turns or struggling years and then find our way.
yeah,
So what, it's those moments that you have where you just, I guess it's the human connection
yeah,
where you feel it's such an honor that students open up, and not in the bullshit, way how I want an extension, but in a conversation about life. And it's, yeah, those are the ones, and you feel like you really get to know them. And
How
that's
many
why
reference letters do you think you've written, Theresa?
oh, I can't even, I write dozens every year,
Yeah,
dozens, and it's extraordinary to me, and I'm always so thrilled to be a part of that journey. But I always feel like it should be the tenure faculty, but I'm the one that often knows them better. And not always, of course, they get to know the tenured faculty in their third and fourth year courses, but it's an interesting thing. And it's letters of reference, but it's also for jobs, summer
Yeah.
jobs, for being a TA in another course, in the first year course, right? Some of our, and it's a great honor to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You must do the same.
I do. I get a lot of students ask me for references, and I'm kind of on a streak right now where almost everybody has been accepted to whatever, like whether it's a job or they'll write back to me and say, thanks for that letter of reference, I got in, or I got the job or whatever. And so that's really, really nice to hear back. I also make a deal with students who are going abroad, at least certainly before COVID, that they have to send me a postcard. If I write you a letter of reference, you have to send me a postcard from Spain or Portugal or wherever they happen to be. And yeah, that's been really incredible. I think that, in a post-COVID era, these connections are even more valuable, important, and when we went, I hope that Global Studies is able to send students away to see the world and to figure things out for themselves of what it looks like. And I remember doing the field course in Kerala with John Abraham, in which 10 students, that was such a big highlight for me of my career in teaching, for sure. So that was amazing.
Can I tell you a fast story? The upside, I'd never thought about the sort of upside of COVID, is that we had students that had discontinued, hadn't fully finished their education, their university education, and were able to come back in an era of COVID because everything was online. And so I had students that it just tickled me that I'd had 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that were now back finishing their degree. And they remembered me.
The upside of COVID.
The upside of COVID. You need it sometimes. But it was really, and it was so nice to reconnect with them. And it took me a few minutes to sort of remember who they were. But once they put it in the context, I was like, oh, and it was funny. We had those very conversations of, do you still have, teach in that little across the street? And I was like, no, it's not there. The school's not there anymore. That kind of thing. But, that's the interesting thing is I never thought, I was like, oh, the upside. Some people got to finish their degree because everything became online because they were international. They were in South America. I had a student in, so in the Middle East who wasn't going to be able to come back, but with COVID, they could.
Yeah. Oh, Theresa, it's been so good to talk with you. I don't know if we have any more. Do we have any last bits of advice or info or things we want to get off our chest?
Well, it's funny because one of your questions to me was, what advice do you have for global studies students?
Yeah.
And it's an interesting question because, I always feel very fortunate with this answer that I get to do as a job, the job that I love. And so that to me, if I could give that advice, and I know that sounds very sort of cliche to find it, because there's privilege that goes with that. but it's, so that's part of it, trying to figure out where you belong. And sometimes life surprises you.
Mm.
I mean, I didn't know how well I was going to fit into global studies, given that I was a sociologist. And I found that it fit better than I thought, and it became a home. And so I think, part of it is trying to figure out, and it's a journey, trying to figure out what you want to do, who you are, where you're going to be happy. And I know we talk about that when you're 20. I hate to tell you people, you're still doing that or I am, when I'm 50, because allow yourself to go with the flow sometimes and allow yourself to be self-reflective. Just because you're in a job doesn't mean you have to be in forever. And sometimes there's been times with global studies over the years that I've stepped away for a term and worked in a different department, shake it up, teach something new, right? I went and taught policy courses, for example, and that was really good for me because it keeps me current. And the other thing I would say is, and why global studies is so important, is because it keeps you informed. What's different about global studies, over the years, is that topics change because of depending on what's happening in the world.
Yes.
And so I am a better global citizen because I teach in global studies, because I have to be well aware of what's in the news, because it comes up in discussions. And so I want to be informed, and I don't know if you feel that way. It's forced me to sort of be very current.
Yes.
In a more
Absolutely.
global manner than I don't know if I would have. I tend to watch way too much CNN. And so I tend to focus on Canada, United States, but global studies forces me to to think about things in a more global manner. Stay curious. That's the other piece of advice. If you and I are good at our jobs, it's because we both stay curious. We both go and learn stuff, and we're okay with not knowing something.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
one of the great things about working at a university, and I remember this, like I was, how many economic questions? I just go to Edgevoa. And I was like, or go to LADA. And I was like, can you just tell me what this is? And they do, or peace and conflict studies with Matthews. Like you have this abundance of people who want to talk to you, get to know your faculty, go to office hours. We're back, we're in person, shoot the shit sometimes. It's nice to get to know people and for them to get to know you as well. And I think that's part of the, what's been missing the last couple of years, because I don't know about you, but during COVID, I had very few people to come see me in office hours. And it was unfortunate because the ones that did, Abby came to see me and I got to know her really well. Do you know what I mean? Like, people get to know because they come in and visit you. But that's important in building relationships. But it's also important in finding your home, where you belong in the university.
Well said. Well said. I would say absolutely everything you said. The only other thing that I would say is have fun with your degree. Enjoy yourself while you're here. And Bina and Theresa, we call ourselves sisters.
From another mister.
Sisters from another mister. Sisters from another mister.
The other. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we I think enjoy global studies because we actually have a really interesting, engaging, and fun time in that 70 minutes that we have, with not even 70 minutes. What is the 50-minute tutorial, right? That we have. I feel like
they're so nice. Do you not find that? Like the global studies students.
Oh my gosh. Almost
my sociology students, but the global studies students are just so kind and nice. And that's been consistent.
Yes.
That's been consistent over the years. And that's been the enjoyable part.
Well,
can I just add a last piece of advice? Best piece of advice I got as an undergrad, because I started university later in life. I was 30 when I started. And later in life, it sounds like I was old. I started at 30, and a friend said to me at the time, take a course in every discipline. You're gonna be encouraged to take a course that you know well. And so it becomes easy. You've done it a million times. You take the same course. And she's like, don't do it. This is such a gift to have 4 years to just study shit you don't know.
Yeah.
And so she said, take a course. And I took that advice as an undergrad. And I took an English course, and I took a film course, and I took, a history course. And I realized that I loved a lot of things. I found my home in sociology, but I found that I could have been a historian. I discovered, film studies, I didn't like as much. No, you know why? Because sometimes I just want to watch a film. I don't want to deconstruct it. And so no disrespect for film students, but you find what isn't your thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's interesting what piques your attention as you go, and read widely.
Yeah.
I try, and I'm not always good at this. I try to read stuff that I disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I admit to throwing it occasionally, but I try to pick it up and continue because I think that's also important, that we become, that we're better if we're reading other opinions.
Yeah.
And so I'm really trying this summer to watch less CNN.
I think that global studies has made me more humble because, like you said, we don't know the answers to quite a few of the questions, and the students enrich the conversation about what are the possibilities to that answer. And so oftentimes I find myself at the end of the day, and I'm one of those people that replays the conversation over and over again. So every tutorial you can imagine, I'm replaying and thinking, what did that mean? And how did I respond to that? And was that, the right thing to say or not say, or, but global studies has allowed me to expand my humility about myself, but also about this really mixed up world. The world is so complicated. And on one hand, right, it is so complicated. And like you say, sometimes you just want to watch a movie. Sometimes you want to eat French fries, which you should not, but that's.
Or watch Coronation Street.
Oh my gosh.
Not me. I know you watch it.
Imran, oh my gosh. Anyway.
No, but I think because I think my equivalent is Young and the Restless. But I think it's because then you just get to enjoy it. So remembering, and especially when things are tough.
Yeah.
Watching American news right now is tough.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's important. And putting it into the broader context and not having all the answers. That's what I've learned about global studies, is embracing that life issues are complicated.
Yeah.
And that you're not going to solve it in one sort of sweeping conversation.
For sure.
It's part of it.
Yeah. Oh, Theresa, thank you.
We're going to do 20 more years, aren't we, Bina?
I'm not sure about that, but I'll be coming in with my,
with our walkers.
I was going to say bifocals, but I'm already on bifocals.
I was going to say great, but we're already there. So.
We're already there. Theresa, I celebrate you. Congratulations on your 20 years.
Well, congratulations on joining the Century Club. It's a good club. Yeah.
Sisters from another mister. Cheers.
Bye, Bina.
Bye.